of freedom from elaboration, due to realizing the mind is free from elaboration. So this word elaboration means grasping to independent existence. So the second one, the yoga of freedom from elaboration, due to realizing the mind is free from elaboration, is due to realizing the mind is empty of inherent existence. So elaboration is another word for grasping or ignorance. The third yoga, the yoga of one taste, due to realizing the mind and appearances as one taste. One taste means indivisible. And we often see this in the Kagyu tradition, this mind and appearances as one taste. Now it seems like there's mind and appearances. They seem to be dualistic, the mind and appearances, but they're of one taste. They're non-dual. And so that's what we're realizing here. And then the yoga of non-meditation, due to it not being a meditation with signs. So this non-meditation, maybe just a few words on that. Remember, we briefly touched on the idea that there can be this, what's called essence Mahamudra, which is sort of on top of the Tantra Mahamudra. And the two things there were these pointing out instructions and non-meditation instructions. And so this is for disciples who are already quite advanced. And what it is that the pointing out instruction is that if the student is at a conducive state, then the master would give simply some short, pithy instructions to point out the nature of the mind to the student, and based on those short, pithy instructions, the student would immediately realise nature of mind, would cut through, in fact, to the very subtle mind and realise nature of mind. But then the master would follow that up with these non-meditation instructions, meaning that if we can cut through to the very subtle mind, that mind is beyond any sort of conceptual activity. So if we can cut through there, then the non-meditation instructions are instructions about how to remain there, to avoid any artificial activity that will pop us back out of there. So these are the two instructions, and these are very high-level instructions to sustain the nature of mind at the very subtle level. So this is often the model that you'll see in the Kagyu Mahamudra tradition, the 4 yogas, and then the extensive presentation of that is that each of those 4 yogas has 3 divisions, sort of small, middling, great, or the 3 levels of each one. So it actually is 12 levels. And there's a very detailed description about what happens at each one of those 12 levels. So if you want to study that, then you'll be able to find that in the Kagyu Mahamudra teachings. But then here we have those 2 models, and some of the masters then have attempted to correlate them, to try and match them, which can be a little bit awkward, because this model here, the 5 paths, is sutra model, meaning this is simply talking about how to progress to enlightenment using the subtle mind only. Whereas this 4-stage model here is, particularly the last 2 stages, is progressing using the very subtle mind. So it's a little bit difficult to correlate the two, because they're using a little bit different level of the mind. But there has been some attempts to sort of have some rough correlation, and we see here one, I think Kagyu Master Je Gotsampa tried to correlate the two, and he's suggesting that in the 4 yogas, the first yoga of single-pointedness is correlating with what's called intentional conduct, which is the first 2 paths. So he's saying that the first yoga is more or less correlated with this. And then he's saying the second yoga of freedom from elaboration. Remember, freedom from elaboration is directly realizing the ultimate nature of the mind, which of course fits very nicely with passive seeing because we're directly realizing emptiness there. So that seems like there's a good correlation. And then the yoga of one taste, due to realizing mind and appearances as one taste, he's saying that that more or less correlates with the second to the seventh ground. And then the yoga of non-meditation is correlated to the last three grounds. But again, it's a sort of a rough correlation due to slightly different approaches to practice, and also in the full yoga model, of course, we are gaining access to the very subtle mind, which in this model there's no mention about very subtle mind, because this is a sutra presentation of the path to enlightenment. Any questions?
What way we are following, the first one or the second one that wants to correlate?
So of course this text, most of it is Sutra Mahamudra, which then would be correlated to that. If we actually, what you find in, then there's, of course, in this text, there's a brief description of Tantra Mahamudra. So if any of you have studied Tantra, there's also, by coincidence really, a 5-stage model in Tantra describing the path to enlightenment, but it's not this 5-stage model. They talk about, anyway, we'll leave it out, but it's got 5 stages in it, and so those 5 stages are then describing how we, through gaining access to the very subtle mind, we move along to enlightenment. Whereas this, of course, is based on gaining access just to the subtle mind. Whereas this 4-stage yoga model is a little bit of a combination of the two. In fact, just to read a little bit more about that, I'll just quote from this book we quoted from yesterday, the Pointing Out the Great Way by Daniel P. Brown. So it's a book on Mahamudra in the Kagyu. He said, there are many models for the stages of meditation. The older Theravada Buddhism developed standard manuals for meditation practice like the path of purification, the Visuddhimagga. Around the same time, one of the first major stage models for meditation in the Indian Mahayana tradition appeared in the works of Asanga and Maitreya. So that's around the 4th, 5th century. He says, in the Ornament for Mahayana Sutras and other works, Asanga describes 2 main stages of meditation, concentration and special insight, so shamatha and vipassana. He further subdivides concentration practice into 9 sub-stages called the 9 stages of mental staying. So those of you who were here for the 2 years ago, that's this model here, the diagram. So this is the shamatha model that we use, how to progress in shamatha. This is the classic 9-stage model coming back from Asanga from the 5th century. He says, concentration practice entails placing and holding the mind on intended meditation object for longer and longer periods without distraction. Reports by meditators over time led to articulation of these 9 discrete gradations or refinements in this capacity. This model eventually found its way into Tibet through the efforts of Atisha and Kamalashila and was eventually adopted there as a standard presentation. So again, in the shamatha practice, we saw that 2 years ago when we looked at this. This is sort of the standard model in shamatha, particularly if we're using the breath as the object of practice. But also in Mahamudra, of course in shamatha, we are also using the mind as the object. So when we're using the mind as the object in Mahamudra system, often they won't use this model for shamatha. They'll use what's called a 4-stage model. Some of you may be familiar with that. And in the 4-stage model, the first stage of progress is that you notice a waterfall of thoughts crashing down, because we're observing the mind and we just notice one thought after another. And if we keep watching that, what we notice over the 2nd stage, it sort of settles down a little bit. So instead of a waterfall of thoughts, there's a fast-flowing river of thoughts. And then if we keep watching the mind, that'll slow down even more. then it'll become a slow-moving river of thoughts, and eventually if we keep watching, then everything will become still. So the slow-moving river will empty into the still lake. So this is usually the model that's used in Mahamudra in shamatha practice, the 4-stage model. The waterfall, fast-flowing river, slow-moving river into the still lake. Whereas this is the sort of the classic model for shamatha, particularly using the objects such as the breath and so forth. So he says a bit more here. In the 12th century, the Tibetan master Gampopa, who again is considered the founder of the Kagyu school, developed a stage model for meditation called the 4-yoga model, which integrated the ordinary shamatha and vipassana practices with the extraordinary Mahamudra practices. It consists of 2 ordinary stages, concentration followed by special insight, these are the first 2, and 2 extraordinary stages, 1 taste yoga followed by non-meditation yoga. Earlier Mahamudra masters rarely delineated clear-cut stages because they were primarily concerned with the essence tradition and its emphasis on instantaneous realization within direct oral transmission. Gampopa's contribution was to give detailed instructions on the stages of ordinary shamatha and vipassana practice to establish a foundation for such realizations. Using the 4-yoga approach, Gampopa integrated the sutra and essence approaches into a single system. And then, no further questions, we'll just finish the last paragraph here. So the third last outline is dedicating virtue through having composed instructions. So Panchen Losang Cheki Gelsen says, by the virtue of I, Losang Cheki Gelsen, a renunciate who has heard many teachings, having composed this text, may all migrators quickly gain victory over the 2 obscurations by means of this path, as there is no other second gateway to the state of peace. Meaning that if we really want to achieve enlightenment, i.e. eliminate these 2 obscurations, there's no other second way to achieve that. We need bodhicitta, we need the wisdom of emptiness, if we really want to achieve that enlightenment. And then there's a verse here, it says, it is the supreme essence churned from the oceans of sutras and tantras. It is the key point of the full intent of the scholars and adepts of India and Tibet. It is the path traversed without exception by the holy Mahasiddhas. May the sun of Mahamudra teachings dawn here today. Amen. Yes. That's all I have to say. Any last questions before we wrap up there for the weekend?
Before we become enlightened.
It depends on you, if you want to become enlightened. Okay, then just if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about Mahamudra, so of course this is the Gelug Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra, and there is a book from His Holiness Dalai Lama called the Gelug Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra, a big fat red book that he comments directly on this text. So if you want to know a little bit more about this particular text, that would be a good book. And remember that this was, we had the preliminaries, shamatha and vipassana were the main parts of this text. So in terms of preliminaries, what I would recommend there is a book by Mingyur Rinpoche called Turning Confusion into Clarity. Very good book on the preliminaries, the foundation practices. And there's also another, I think, quite a good book called Not for Happiness by Songsar Khyentse, also about the preliminaries. In terms of the shamatha practice, I highly recommend Attention Revolution by Alan Wallace. He not only introduces the practice of observing the breath, but he also introduces these practices here in this text of observing the mind and resting in awareness. So, excellent book for shamatha. In terms of vipassana, again, following the sort of the classic Tsongkhapa approach that we've followed mainly here, one good book that I tend to recommend for beginners is How to See Yourself as You Really Are by His Holiness Dalai Lama. I think that's also in Hebrew, yeah. So that's also available in Hebrew, that book. Another good book based on that explanation is Introduction to Emptiness by Guy Newland. That's a direct sort of commentary on sort of this Sankara presentation that we followed here.
That's on the 11th pass. On those books.
The what?
On the 11th pass, we have time to read all.
Oh, okay.
Introduction to Emptiness is by him?
Guy Newland. Guy Newland. So that's a very good book. And then if you're sort of more interested in the sort of the oral Kagyu Mahamudra approach, I can really recommend any books written by Trungpa Rinpoche. Trungpa Rinpoche. He's coming from the Kagyu tradition. He's one of the teachers I used to follow. In particular, one book I find very good there is Crystal Clear. It's called Crystal Clear, a very practical book about Mahamudra meditation. Another book from the Kagyu tradition I find very helpful is called Mind at Ease by Tralik Rinpoche, or Tralik Gyatgong. So there's a few books if you're interested to read more about Mahamudra, and of course then you have also some wonderful teachings. I think some of you were attending recently here in when's he coming again? Next year? Jado Rinpoche. So Jado Rinpoche, maybe some of you attended his teachings now, but he's coming back, and he's coming back for a couple of years, and he's going to be going through this text. So he's going to be going through this text, and Jado Rinpoche is one of the great masters in the Tibetan tradition. So if you have an opportunity to follow that, I highly recommend that. And that's about all I have to say. So I'd lastly just like to thank Dharma friends and all the volunteers who helped put together this weekend. So thank you very much for that. And I'd like lastly thank all of you for making the time and effort to come here. Hopefully you got something out of this weekend, and I hope to see you again in the not too distant future. So thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank
It's
you.
been a great experience. I hope you come back again to see you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it? Done?
Thank you.